Welcome. This is Business Edge on News Central. I'm Tolulope. Adeleru-Balogun. Our headline story: OPEC Plus squeezes oil production to protect price recovery. Now, following the OPEC Plus meeting, members have agreed to keep oil production in check. Additionally, Saudi Arabia will extend its unilateral output cut of 1 million barrels a day through April. Russia and Kazakhstan have sought exemptions to their oil production and been granted those. Here are a few questions we will answer in today's show. How will the outcome of the meeting affect oil-dependent countries? What does the decision mean for the price of crude oil on the market? Welcome. This is Business Edge. OPEC Plus, that is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, plus countries that are not members of the group, shocked the oil markets at the end of its meeting this March. The shock came from the group's decision to keep supply in check. This sent prices surging and added inflationary pressure to the global economy as it crawls out of the COVID-19 pandemic. 1 year from the outbreak of COVID-19 that sent crude oil prices near zero, Saudi Arabia has shown that its priority is preserving the hard-won oil recovery rather than worrying about tightening the market. OPEC and its allies have been debating whether to restore as much as 1.5 million barrels a day of output in April 2021. But after being urged to keep our powder dry by Prince Abdulaziz, OPEC Plus members agreed to hold steady at current levels, with the exception of modest increases granted to Russia and Kazakhstan. Brent crude oil has already rallied about 30% this year to almost $68 a barrel and above. Throughout the first quarter, OPEC Plus has kept production below demand in order to drain the excess that built up during the worst of the COVID-19 lockdowns. Without additional supply, that deficit will widen significantly in April, according to the cartel's internal estimates. However, with the bond market already on edge for signs of inflation, the aggressive move from OPEC Plus could become a headache for the U.S. Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank. The decision comes at a tense time for the Saudi-American alliance, as President Joe Biden seeks to reset the relationship with Riyadh, and particularly with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Joining me on the show is Benjamin Ato Quansah. He's a financial analyst based in Accra, Ghana. Benjamin, nice to have you again. Thank you so much for joining us on Business Edge.
Thank you for having me once again.
All right, so I said earlier that the decision by OPEC Plus shocked the world, but there were a few people who said that they saw this coming. So in terms of the decision taken to keep the rates and keep the production at where it was, is this what you were expecting to come out of the meeting from OPEC this month?
Not at all. I mean, I had a similar position to what a lot of other analysts did. A lot of us thought that that supply was going to be ramped up by as much as about 1.5 million barrels, but I think that the members of the OPEC Plus had a different idea, and so I strongly think that this is going to be a short-term thing. It is probably in the best interest of oil-producing nations that supply is still maintained at the current levels, just like the OPEC Plus has agreed to do. Prices are going to be maintained at the same level, and so far what we have seen is a beautiful game of supply side management by the members of the OPEC Plus, and that is what has kept the prices of crude oil at the current level. So what we need to do now is to find out ways that we can bring up demand to levels of pre-COVID. And once we get to those levels, then I think that the OPEC Plus would be in a very good position to increase their supply and production.
All right. So Saudi Arabia is de facto leader for OPEC and OPEC Plus as well. And we've been hearing from them urging caution since late last year, urging caution before increasing production. And Saudi has once again volunteered to keep its own voluntary cuts in place. What really is behind this Saudi Arabian decision? Is it just what it seems on the surface? Or is there more to it for why Saudi Arabia is continually volunteering to keep production costs down for them in particular?
Okay, so I think that this voluntary maintenance of the 1 million barrel reduction for for they themselves is really in the best interest of the whole group. We have had members like Russia and other countries who are not or who have a different opinion to what the OPEC Plus or what other members of the OPEC Plus, particularly Saudi Arabia, has. And so sometimes in the interest of making sure that the entire group is kept happy, somebody has to fall on their sword. And for Saudi Arabia, 1 million barrels per day isn't that significant. I mean, at the height of their production, they were producing somewhere around 11 million barrels per day. But currently, they are producing just a little over 8 million barrels per day. And at the current price levels, it's still extremely profitable to them. A million barrels cut is really not going to hurt them that much. Personally, I think that it looks like it is what it seems on the surface of it. And that's what it is. We just thank them for this good fortune or this goodwill. Okay, so it is what it seems on the surface. So just projecting ahead very quickly, we know that OPEC Plus will meet again on April the 1st to discuss production levels for May. But many analysts have said that the decision announced last week is really for April and May. Do you think this is the direction that the group is headed? Are we going to see literally the same thing happen in May as well? Historically, that's what we've seen. Even in January, we noticed that. Even in January, we noticed that the meeting that was held was pretty much for January and February. So historically, that is what we have seen, that when the meeting is had, or at least for this period, when the meeting is had, it is for at least the next 2 months. And so depending on how economic dynamics turn up to be, depending on how the coronavirus management by various countries all over the world goes, we will see whether the next meeting is going to take place as scheduled. Okay, so let's look at the exemptions that were granted this time around. Now, Russia and Kazakhstan will be allowed to increase production by 130,000 barrels and 20,000 barrels per day, respectively. They were also granted these exemptions February and March last year, I believe. Why are we seeing exemptions being granted, and particularly for Russia and Kazakhstan? What pressing needs maybe do they have that are putting exemptions in play for them? I think at this time, one of the things is that it is vital that key members of the group are kept happy. Members of the OPEC Plus, they argue fiercely about their positions on supply management, and these positions are sometimes very polarized. As is the case now, Russia thinks that it is time to increase production, while Saudi Arabia thinks the world or OPEC Plus members should still remain very cautious. Sometimes a compromise has to be reached in the interest of keeping everything together. I believe this is one of the reasons why the exemption has been granted. Another thing is that we know that for Russia, break-even price for crude oil is significantly higher than for Saudi Arabia. For Russia, it's somewhere around $25 to $30 a barrel. And for Saudi Arabia, it's somewhere around $5 a barrel. And so right now, I mean, they are just really interested in recovering from the losses that they incurred last year, or even so late last year when prices hit as low as they did. So I think that that's the reason why, and they must be making a very compelling argument for them to be offered these continuous exemptions. All right, so quickly on that before we take a break. So do you think there's going to be any a particular effect on the global market or even price coming from the fact that there is a bit of increased production that's going to be coming from Russia and Kazakhstan? What do you think is going to be the knockdown effect of that? I don't think that oil prices are going to change that much. I don't think it's very likely. Even if it does, it's going to be very minimal. I think that collectively, Russia and Kazakhstan have been given the exemptions for about 150,000 barrels a day by the end of April, while other members still maintain their current levels of production. Overall, this exemption will be severely immaterial to world crude oil prices. Let's also not forget that Saudi Arabia is still voluntarily cutting down supply by 1 million barrels per day for themselves. And we foresee this continuing well into April. And many analysts, just like you mentioned, predicted going into this latest OPEC Plus meeting that there was going to be an increase in supply. So an increase of just 150,000 barrels per day by April by these two countries is still well below the expectation of about 1.5 million barrels per day that analysts had going into the meeting. So it's really not going to be very significant.
All right. Benjamin, we're going to take a quick time out. When we come back, we'll look at what all of this means for African oil producers. In terms of something you said interesting, keeping everyone happy. Really? Are African oil producers that are members of OPEC Plus happy with this decision? We'll get into that right after this. Stay with us. This is Business Edge. Accra-based financial analyst Benjamin Quansah is still with me on Business Edge. Let's get into this part. Now, let's look at the decision and what it means for some African members of OPEC. They include Algeria, Nigeria, Gabon, Angola, Equatorial Guinea, Libya, and Congo. Benjamin, it's very obvious that these are countries that would actually need more production to make more money, but they're also enjoying higher prices right now at particularly, I guess we'd say, lower levels of production than they're used to. We know their economies are struggling after the pandemic. Why are there no exemptions for them? Did they seek none, or is it just a situation that there is none to be made?
I think that we didn't seek anything from the OPEC Plus, also because the voice of African nations in this group is not as loud as other countries. Russia is the second largest exporter of crude oil in the world. And so a request by them for an exemption like this is likely to be heard, or is likely to be paid more heed than countries like Nigeria and then Angola. Even though we are significant players, we are not quite as significant as Russia. That's the reality. And so I think that is the main reason. Even if we did request for them, even if Nigeria and Angola and Equatorial Guinea and other countries requested for these exemptions, it is not likely that it would have had the same level of effect as Russia or any other major player in the OPEC Plus group.
And that's a situation of influence and power. Do you ever think that will change anytime in the future?
It is possible that it can change, but at the moment, it's not very likely. The level of influence that any country can exert in the OPEC Plus is mainly dependent on the level of production. And at the moment, a lot of other countries produce so much more than us as African countries. And so, like I mentioned in my other interviews, if countries like Nigeria and Angola, other big African countries which produce a lot of crude oil, come together to form alliances by themselves, such that, for example, Nigeria, Equatorial Guinea, and Angola come together as a unit and get onto the OPEC Plus group, of course, they're going to have a much louder voice than Nigeria alone and Angola and Equatorial Guinea speaking for themselves. And so that is one angle that we can look at this from.
All right. So these same countries, some of them, Nigeria, Angola, Ghana, South Sudan, and many other oil-producing nations in Africa, are earning more now due to the current selling price of crude oil. But these cuts in production, we know, won't last forever. These high prices likely will not also last forever. What should these countries be doing right now while prices are high? Some have mentioned sovereign wealth funds that can have the excess from the crude oil coming into it. What do you think should be done right now while these prices are high where they are right now?
It's interesting that you mentioned the sovereign wealth funds, but for those that are members of the OPEC Plus, I will say that I will advise that it would be good for them to stay within the production limits. There's a reason why quotas have been given to members of the OPEC Plus. Now, the prices of oil have reached their current levels mainly because of supply side management by the group, as I indicated earlier. It is the only way to maintain the current prices of oil as demand rallies and gains momentum to return to pre-COVID levels. I would advise everyone to still respect the safety protocols by their governments to aid in managing the pandemic and take the vaccines. I'm aware, and then now mentioning, coming to talk a little bit about the sovereign wealth funds, I'm aware that Ghana has a sovereign fund which manages some of its oil revenues. The fund currently has about $450 million in assets and is growing. I would be surprised if other countries like Nigeria, Angola do not have any form of fund to manage oil revenues. If these revenues form a significant portion of their economies, I mean, that if that's the case, for countries exporting non-renewable resources, the principal challenge is how to transform such resources into sustainable and stable future income compensating for the volatility in the commodity prices, as we have seen in recent times, and also the way that the supplies are finite. So placing commodity revenue in a sovereign fund is a means to avoid unpredictable cycles that tend to take countries by surprise. Also, a well-managed and effective sovereign wealth fund can help protect the rest of a country's economy and from a destabilizing situation of currency fluctuations, while helping to spread the country's wealth more equitably across generations. So it is good that prices are at their levels right now, but for members of the OPEC Plus, I think it is really important that they stick to the quotas that they have been given by the group that they themselves have chosen to be a part of.
So we know obviously there are winners and losers with this decision from OPEC Plus. Rising fuel prices have cost the head of Brazil's state oil company, that's Petroleum, his job. They've led India, which is the world's third largest crude importer, to ask that OPEC raise oil production. And we've seen Turkey's inflation rates rise above 15%. But the bigger question is whether or not the global economy is winning or losing with this decision from OPEC Plus. So what do you think? A lot of people are saying we should be not aggressive, but put more crude oil on the market. It's Saudi Arabia that really seems to be holding on to this. Be cautious. Let's wait things out. Is the global economy winning or losing by this decision that OPEC Plus has taken?
At the moment, I don't think the global economy is losing or winning. I think that we are doing a good job at managing the coronavirus pandemic, which is really the reason why we are in this position at the moment. The vaccines have come out, and a lot more people than I anticipated are taking these vaccines. Last time I checked, over 300 million shots had been given worldwide. And so the important thing is that we get the world back to the same level of crude demand as was the case before the coronavirus. And that's the only way that we can really increase supply to match up this demand, because like I've mentioned severally already, an increase in supply without a corresponding increase in the demand is just going to drive the prices of fuel down, or prices of the crude oil down.
All right. So as we start wrapping things up, we've seen U.S. President Joe Biden make a number of interesting decisions that could have some consequences. He has canceled some pipeline projects for environmental reasons. We know that fracking is also under the hammer as well. He has signed the U.S. back on to the Paris Climate Change Accord. Countries like Nigeria were affected when the U.S. went a lot more into fracking. What do you think will be the outcome of some of Biden's decisions, the climate change one, the fracking one, as well as environmental concerns, as it concerns the XXL pipeline and different other areas as well?
I think that President Joe Biden made his position on the U.S.'s reliance on fossil fuels very clear, even before he became president. And this is seen to be taking shape by the U.S.'s recent return to the Paris Agreement on climate change, just like you just mentioned. I think that the president's focus is more on developing the renewable energy sector and withdrawing at least some forms of government support for any forms of energy that increase their carbon footprint. I can't say for certain how fracking will be affected, but I think that it is very obvious it won't receive a high level of support from this current president. Also, on the Paris Agreement on climate change, I first of all don't think that it is necessarily a bad thing for Nigeria and Africa. I mean, historically, it wasn't too good for them, but I think that the concerns being raised by analysts who think that it is bad for Africans is that we need to pay more attention to the impact of our actions currently are having on the environment. It is a conversation of environmental sustainability and how we can preserve the environment for future generations while satisfying our own needs. Our dependence on fossil fuels is definitely one of the main reasons why some analysts make this argument, and that's probably why you're also making this argument. But the Paris Agreement considers more than just fossil fuels. It looks at ways in which countries can reduce greenhouse gas emissions to an acceptable level, and I think every country has a role to play in this. Highly industrialized countries like China and India are huge culprits when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah. And so if the US's return to the Paris Agreement on climate change is going to be quote unquote bad, then it is going to be that way for a whole lot of countries, and not just countries like Nigeria or Africans in general.
And the hope is that African oil producers are prepared for that future. We don't know when it's going to be exactly. We've seen the rise of electric and battery-powered cars. OPEC has still said that the world still needs fossil fuels. But also we know it's a finite resource. And as you said, climate change issues are demanding we change how we use fossil fuels. So we do hope African oil producers are preparing for a future where their main cash cow is pushed out of the game. Benjamin Quansah, financial analyst, joining me from Accra, Ghana. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you so much for having me once again.
We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
All right, as we wrap things up, let's do that with a few stories we're keeping our eyes on. And of course, starting with nothing else but oil. Saudi Arabia and Russia have pledged to continue cooperation on the OPEC Plus production cut agreement, as Saudi's foreign minister, Prince Faisal bin Farhan, says that the group was aiming for a fair price for crude oil. The comment follows the most recent OPEC Plus decision on March the 4th to roll over most quotas for another month, except for exemptions granted to Russia and Kazakhstan. Nigeria's stock market has overcome its negative posture, growing by 128 billion naira following bargain buying in Dangote Cement and Nestle. This comes with news of approval for demutualization. Moving to the southern part of the continent, South Africa's Compensation Fund Commissioner Vuyo Mafata has gazetted additional regulations to the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act for domestic workers. Now, the Gazette confirms that domestic workers are now covered under the Act for illness or injury contracted at work. It also provides further information on the types of compensation that will be paid and what compensation will be paid for. And finally, the African Export-Import Bank will begin implementing its $1 billion Continental Transit Guarantee Scheme, of which about $200 million is earmarked for the COMESA region. This comes after it signed the instrument of accession to the Inter-Surety Agreement for the implementation of the COMESA Regional Customs Transit Guarantee, or rather Bond Agreement. And that's it on this edition of Business News. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. Head to our website for much more and download our mobile app to take you everywhere with you. We're online, offline, and on the ground. This has been Business Edge. I'm Tolulope, Adeleru-Balogun. Have a great day.